Welcome to Hollywood Secrets Information. In this video, we are going to uncover 10 nasty rumors from the golden age of Hollywood. Stories involving secret relationships, hidden children, studio manipulation, mysterious deaths, addiction, and scandals that powerful people allegedly tried to keep away from the public. Some of these stories were nothing more than vicious Hollywood gossip, while others were later supported by testimony, biographies, or evidence. So, as we travel through the glamorous world of classic Hollywood, remember, not every rumor is a fact, but sometimes the truth behind the rumor is even more shocking. 1. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was known as the ultimate Hollywood leading man, the handsome, confident star who became an icon through films such as It Happened One Night and Gone with the Wind. But behind that polished image was a secret involving actress Loretta Young that remained hidden from the public for decades. In 1935, Young became pregnant while she and Gable were working together on The Call of the Wild. She disappeared from public view during her pregnancy, and in November of that year she gave birth to a daughter, Judy Lewis. Young later presented the child as an adopted daughter, carefully concealing her biological connection to Gable. For years, Hollywood insiders suspected the truth because Judy strongly resembled Gable. The relationship between Young and Gable had been known as a Hollywood secret, but the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy became far more disturbing decades later. In 2015, members of Young's family revealed that Young had privately described the encounter as non-consensual, while earlier accounts had described it as an affair. Because Young herself was no longer alive to clarify the conflicting accounts, the exact circumstances remain deeply contested. What is established is that Judy Lewis was Gable's biological daughter and that her true parentage was hidden for most of her childhood. The story is a powerful example of how Hollywood's star system could protect an actor's public image while forcing private lives into secrecy. 2. Judy Garland. To millions of moviegoers, Judy Garland was the unforgettable Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. But behind her cheerful screen image was one of the darker stories of the Hollywood studio system. Garland entered MGM as a teenager, and the studio expected her to remain energetic, youthful, slim, and constantly available for work. Accounts from the period describe a brutal schedule and intense pressure over her appearance. Even more disturbing was the use of stimulants and sleeping medication. According to historical accounts and later testimony, Garland and other young performers were given so-called pep pills to keep them working through exhausting schedules, followed by sleeping pills when it was time to rest. Garland herself described being given stimulants to stay awake and sedatives to sleep. The practice was not simply a rumor invented decades later. Former child star Shirley Temple Black publicly recalled that it was widely known that Garland had been given stimulants at MGM. Over time, Garland developed a serious dependence on drugs, and her personal struggles became increasingly public. The tragedy is that audiences saw a magical performer while the studio system often treated her like a product that had to keep performing. Her story doesn't simply reveal a scandal. It shows the enormous human cost behind Hollywood's golden image. Garland died in 1969 at just 47, leaving behind an extraordinary legacy and a cautionary story about what fame can demand from a young performer. 3. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was Hollywood's legendary swashbuckler, famous for adventure films and a reputation as a hard-living ladies' man. But one of the nastiest claims ever attached to his name was the allegation that he secretly worked as a Nazi spy. The accusation became particularly famous after biographer Charles Hyam published claims in 1980 suggesting that Flynn had connections to Nazi Germany. Hyam's book portrayed the actor as someone involved in secret activities that went far beyond ordinary Hollywood celebrity life. The story was explosive because Flynn had been a major star during the years surrounding World War II, when America was deeply involved in the fight against Nazi Germany. But there was a major problem. Other researchers strongly challenged Hyam's claims. Flynn's former friend and stunt double Buster Wiles, together with researcher William Donati, argued that the Nazi allegations were unsupported and even accused Hayem of manipulating evidence. The Los Angeles Times reported the dispute and noted that Donati's research challenged Hayem's version of events. So was Errol Flynn really a Nazi spy? There is no solid consensus establishing that accusation as fact. What makes the story fascinating is how easily a glamorous celebrity's reputation could become mixed with espionage rumors, especially when the alleged events took place during wartime. Flynn certainly lived a controversial personal life, but the Nazi spy story remains one of the most disputed allegations in his biography. 4. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford built one of the most famous careers in Hollywood history. She transformed herself from a young dancer into a major MGM star and eventually became an Oscar-winning actress. But her rise was surrounded by rumors about her life before Hollywood fame. One particularly persistent allegation claimed that Crawford had worked as a prostitute or had appeared in an early pornographic film before becoming a major star. Such stories circulated for years, but their reliability is extremely questionable. The problem was that Crawford had reportedly altered details about her age and early life, making it difficult for later writers to separate fact from fiction. Sensational biographies and Hollywood gossip repeatedly recycled the claims, sometimes presenting rumors as though they were proven history. One infamous alleged film, The Casting Couch, has frequently been connected to these stories, but the evidence surrounding the supposed film and Crawford's involvement is highly disputed. Crawford's real life was already dramatic enough without questionable stories added to it. She had endured poverty, fought aggressively for career opportunities, and carefully constructed a new identity for herself. In Hollywood, however, reinvention often came with a price. The public became fascinated by what stars had supposedly been like before fame, and gossip writers could make enormous claims with very little evidence. Crawford's story reminds us that some of old Hollywood's dirty secrets may have been created or exaggerated precisely because scandals sold newspapers and magazines. Her career survived the gossip, and she ultimately became one of the defining actresses of her generation. 5. Thomas Ince. Thomas Ince was a major figure in early Hollywood, but his death became the center of one of the industry's most persistent mysteries. In 1924, Ince was aboard the yacht of publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst during a weekend gathering. During the trip, Ince became seriously ill. He was eventually taken off the yacht and transported toward medical care, but he died shortly afterward. The official explanation involved illness and heart problems, yet rumors immediately began circulating about what had really happened. One sensational version claimed that Ince had been accidentally shot during an argument involving Hearst and another famous guest, Charlie Chaplin. The alleged motive was often connected to a supposed romantic misunderstanding involving Hearst's companion, Marion Davies. The story became one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries because the people involved were extraordinarily powerful and famous. But the shooting story has never been established as proven fact. Later retellings added increasingly dramatic details, turning an unclear death into something resembling a Hollywood thriller. That's precisely why this story needs caution. A mysterious death is not automatically evidence of murder, and repeated gossip does not transform an allegation into historical fact. Still, the circumstances surrounding Ince's final days have kept historians and Hollywood storytellers fascinated for generations. His death became an example of how, in the Golden Age, powerful names, secrecy, and unanswered questions could create rumors that survived long after the original witnesses were gone. 6. Marilyn Monroe. Few Hollywood stars have generated more rumors than Marilyn Monroe. Her sudden death in 1962 created an enormous mystery that continues to attract speculation decades later. Monroe was found dead at her Los Angeles home, and her death was officially classified as a probable suicide resulting from a barbiturate overdose. But almost immediately, alternative theories began appearing. Some stories suggested she had been murdered. Others connected her death to powerful political figures, secret relationships, organized crime, or government agencies. One of the most famous rumors involved alleged affairs with President John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. Over the decades, books, documentaries, tabloids, and conspiracy theories transformed these allegations into increasingly elaborate stories. But it is important to separate documented history from speculation. Monroe did have documented relationships with powerful and famous people, and her personal struggles with prescription medication are well established. Historical accounts also show that prescription drugs were deeply embedded in the Hollywood studio culture of the era. But that does not prove the murder theories. Empty medication bottles were found in Monroe's bedroom, and her death has remained officially classified as an overdose. The enduring mystery comes partly from the fact that Monroe was more than an actress. She was a symbol. Her beauty, fame, vulnerability, and connections to powerful people created the perfect environment for conspiracy theories. More than 6 decades later, the rumors remain famous, but the evidence does not support treating every conspiracy as established truth. 7. Cary Grant. Cary Grant appeared to represent everything Hollywood wanted from a leading man: sophistication, charm, humor, and effortless elegance. But behind the perfect public image was a private life that generated plenty of speculation. During the 1980s, several biographies attempted to portray Grant in a much darker and more complicated way than the public had previously known. One of the recurring subjects was his relationship with actor Randolph Scott. Grant and Scott shared a house for a period, and their close friendship became the subject of decades of gossip. Some writers later portrayed the relationship as romantic, while others disputed that interpretation. The issue became particularly controversial because Hollywood stars of Grant's generation were expected to protect an extremely carefully managed public image. Grant himself never publicly embraced the sensational versions of his private life. In fact, competing biographies produced very different interpretations of the same period. The Los Angeles Times noted that biographies were portraying a darker side of Grant, while also discussing the controversy surrounding other Hollywood stars. This is an important reminder about celebrity history. A rumor can become common knowledge simply because enough books repeat it. Grant's life certainly contained personal struggles and complicated relationships, but historians must distinguish documented facts from interpretations imposed decades later. The mystery surrounding his private life only strengthened his legendary status. Even today, Cary Grant remains one of the classic examples of a Hollywood star whose carefully polished public persona encouraged audiences to wonder what might have been happening behind closed doors. 8. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin is remembered as one of the greatest performers in cinema history. His Little Tramp character became an international symbol of silent film comedy. Yet Chaplin's personal life was surrounded by controversy, gossip, and accusations that followed him throughout his career. His relationships with much younger women became a particular source of public outrage. His second marriage, to Lita Grey, was especially controversial because she was only 16 when they married, while Chaplin was in his 30s. Their relationship later collapsed in a bitter divorce, generating sensational newspaper coverage. Chaplin also faced political controversy later in life, especially because of his views and his refusal to become an American citizen. Rumors and accusations surrounding his private life became so intense that his public image was dramatically different from the innocent Little Tramp character audiences loved on screen. Another long-running Hollywood story connected Chaplin to the mysterious death of producer Thomas Ince, because both men were reportedly aboard William Randolph Hearst's yacht when Ince became ill. However, the dramatic claims about an accidental shooting have never been conclusively established. Chaplin's story demonstrates the enormous difference between a screen persona and a private human being. The little tramp represented innocence and vulnerability, while the real Chaplin lived a complicated life filled with fame, relationships, political controversy, and scandal. His artistic achievements remain enormous, but his personal history is much more complicated than the cheerful image created by his most famous character. 9. The dark side of the Hollywood studio system. One of the nastiest rumors from Golden Age Hollywood was actually connected to a much broader reality. Powerful studio executives could exercise enormous control over actors' careers and private lives. For decades, stories circulated about the so-called casting couch, claims that ambitious actresses were pressured into personal relationships with powerful men in exchange for career opportunities. While individual stories varied and some were exaggerated, historical research has documented that sexual exploitation and harassment existed within the industry. Actress Janice Page later described being sent on a date with a man she did not know, an encounter that became dangerous. Judy Garland also reported being groped by MGM executive Louis B. Mayer when she was still a teenager. These stories reveal why rumors could flourish in old Hollywood. When powerful people controlled contracts, salaries, publicity, and careers, victims often had strong reasons to remain silent. Studios also had reputations to protect. The result was an environment where gossip could sometimes be dismissed as fantasy, even when it contained uncomfortable truths. At the same time, modern audiences should be careful not to repeat every old Hollywood story as fact. Some allegations are documented, others remain disputed. The larger historical reality, however, is undeniable. The studio system created an enormous power imbalance between young performers and the executives who controlled their futures. That imbalance helped create many of the rumors, secrets, and scandals that still fascinate audiences today. 10. The Hollywood drug rumors. Another dark rumor surrounding Golden Age Hollywood involved the astonishing working schedules imposed on actors. For years, stories circulated that studios were using drugs to keep stars working when ordinary human exhaustion should have forced them to stop. Unlike some Hollywood legends, there is substantial historical evidence that stimulants and sedatives were used within the entertainment industry. Judy Garland's experience is perhaps the most famous example. Historical accounts describe studio doctors providing stimulants to help actors remain awake and sleeping medication to help them rest. Garland later described being given pills to keep working for extraordinary periods of time. Other performers also experienced pressure to maintain their appearance and productivity. Actress Debbie Reynolds recalled being directed toward a studio doctor for so-called vitamin injections during the exhausting production of Singin' in the Rain. Reynolds believed these may have been similar to substances that had harmed Garland. The important point is that Hollywood's drug culture was not necessarily some secret conspiracy controlled by one studio executive. Amphetamines and other medications were widely used in American society during this period, and medical attitudes toward them were very different from today's standards. The Golden Age demanded extraordinary productivity, and drugs were sometimes treated as tools rather than dangerous substances. The glamorous movies survived, but some of the people who made them paid a terrible personal price. And there you have it, 10 of the nastiest rumors, secrets, and controversial stories connected to the Golden Age of Hollywood. From Clark Gable's hidden daughter and Judy Garland's painful experience inside the studio system to Errol Flynn's disputed spy allegations and the endless mysteries surrounding Marilyn Monroe, these stories remind us that Hollywood's golden age was not always as glamorous behind the cameras as it appeared on screen. But remember, Hollywood rumor and historical fact are not always the same thing. Some stories have strong evidence behind them. Some remain disputed, and others may have been exaggerated by decades of gossip. If you enjoyed this journey into the darker side of classic Hollywood, hit the like button, subscribe to Hollywood Secrets Information, and turn on notifications because there are many more forgotten scandals, mysteries, and untold stories waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Hollywood Secrets information video.